The American College of Pediatricians comes to the aid of Brandon Wegner, a 15-year-old in Michigan, who was disciplined for an op-ed regarding homosexual adoption. I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Ron Miller, associate dean at the Helms School of Government at Liberty University. And Ron, this is a situation where we've talked about before on faith and freedom. 15-year-old Brandon Wegner, he has an interest in journalism, and so he writes as a reporter for the school's student-initiated, student-run newspaper, which is called the Hawks Post. And the Hawks Post is something where students write all kinds of things in it. And there's a teacher advisor that basically reviews for comments such as spelling, grammar, punctuation, things like that, but not for the content so much. Lets the students have a lot of free latitude on content as long as it's not libelous, for example. But in this particular case, Brandon got with another student by the name of Maddie, who is a copy editor for the Hawks Post, and they came up with ideas. And they wanted to do a point-counterpoint op-ed, one person taking one position, one person taking the other position. One of the topics was homosexual adoption. They presented it to the teacher. The teacher approved it. They wrote the article, and then that's when everything broke loose because a parent in the community who's homosexual complained to the principal, and then Brandon was drugged from one meeting to the next, from the principal's office to others, finally ended up in the superintendent's office, and this situation is still ongoing. Liberty Counsel's involved helping Brandon Wegner.
What I don't understand about the situation is that there's a time-honored tradition in real journalism of being able to present alternative points of view so that people, a self-governing people, can actually look at it and make their own decisions. We're at a point now where freedom of conscience is so oppressed in America that you can't express a point of view that goes against the prevailing wisdom, because not only will they disagree with you, they will use the force of the institutions and all of these other things to basically silence you or force you to submit to their point of view. And it goes against everything that our First Amendment rights speak to with regard to not only freedom of conscience, but expression.
That's right. I mean, here you've got these two students that chose a topic of interest. And if you look at the actual Hawks Post, which we have it posted online on our website at lc.org, it's part of our press release when we originally broke this story. There's a column on the left-hand side, and it's Brendan's column, and there's a column on the opposite side, which is Maddie's column. And in the middle, they have the two people sort of jousting with each other as a playful gesture. And Brandon takes the view that homosexual adoption is wrong, and he cites the Bible as the basis in part for his view that homosexual adoption is wrong. Maddie takes the view that homosexual adoption should be allowed because you don't want to have children stuck in foster care. That was Maddie's position. And so they go back and forth and they talk about this issue. It goes through the normal process. They do a polite civic discussion on a controversial issue, and they flesh it out between themselves, and it gets approved by the teacher. They're not renegades. They're not running down the hallway shouting things. They're not talking badly about anyone. They're not denigrating any particular person. But a parent then complains, and this principal then drags Brandon into a meeting and says to Brandon that you can't talk about religion because you're too young to talk about religion, and you can't talk about it in the school newspaper, politics, or social issues, that's off limits. Now, what does that say to a journalist? Someone who, in Brandon's case, wants to be a journalist, someone who likes it so much he's spending time working on the school newspaper and is trying to learn journalistic skills. It goes against that time-honored tradition that you talked about.
The fact is that journalism should be about the free flow of information and ideas. That's essential to an informed citizenry. And I commend the young man because of all of the things that he's going through, and he's learning a lot about what it means, particularly when we talk about terms like liberal and tolerance. Liberal is supposed to be expansive in its point of view, and here was an opportunity for them to expand on a topic, and he's not able to do so. And we're supposed to be tolerant, but they are showing intolerance. So he's learning early some of the actual euphemisms in the community that come into effect when you try to do journalism the right way.
Yeah, when you think of liberal, you think of expansion and all-inclusive. And in fact, what ultimately happens, at least with modern liberalism, is that it is exclusive and it is very narrow, and it is very intolerant to views that are not consistent with liberalism, and particularly religion and or moral issues on homosexuality and other matters as well. Well, Brandon not only gets drug into the principal's office, he gets drug into the superintendent's office. The superintendent then calls him ignorant. He says to Brandon, you need to retract your views, when Brandon says he can't because they're views that he holds based upon his biblical belief. The superintendent calls him ignorant. Of all things, for an educator to call a student ignorant, you're an educator. You don't call students ignorant. The implication that can have and the long-term consequence that can have, especially over a 15-year-old, is significant. And yet he calls him ignorant and then threatens him with suspension. But now what we have is Den Trumbull, who is a medical doctor. He's a pediatrician, and he is the president of the American College of Pediatricians. And he and his organization has written a letter to the superintendent. And the letter essentially says, wait a minute, Mr. Superintendent, don't make these judgments based upon political pressure, because, in fact, there is some evidence out there that supports Brendan's view that homosexual adoption is not in the best interest of children.
It's interesting that when we talk about the evidence that's out there and people look at it, the term consensus always gets thrown in there. And I think when you're talking about matters of science, you should always be very cautious when you hear the word consensus, because that means that we're not talking about the evidence, we're not talking about facts, we're talking about a prevailing view where a mass of people come together and say this is how it should be. And then they try to conform the rest of society to that point of view. So I think that what we have here with the American College of Pediatricians is a warning that says, look at the evidence before you make judgment. Unfortunately, in this case, he's already made judgment by the statement he made to Brendan about him being ignorant. And just the notion of an adult calling a 15-year-old child ignorant. And Brendan, in this case, said, it's because of my beliefs, which goes right back to the heart of that freedom of conscience. When we think about it, if we cannot think what we want to think and then express those thoughts, then where are we as a nation? And I think that's something Newt Gingrich spoke earlier in this campaign about anti-religious bigotry. And I think that whole concept wrapped around the notion of protecting freedom of conscience and religious liberty is something that we need to really stress in all of these kinds of cases. And one of the things I just think Liberty Counsel is excellent at is going after those and just pinpointing those and really bringing them to the forefront.
Well, that's exactly right. I think the issue of religious bigotry is something that is becoming more and more escalated. And I think the comment that you're talking about is something very critical as we move forward. And that's what you have here is religious bigotry. You have here the president of the American College of Pediatricians pushing back against the superintendent. And he says, quote, in this letter, there is no clear evidence that children reared in same-sex-led households fare as well as those reared by their biological heterosexual parents. In fact, he says, there is evidence of relative risk to the child within the non-biological setting. It appears that this is the point that this student was trying to make. You were quoted as saying that you were, quote, taking steps to prevent items of this nature from happening in the future, close quote. In crafting your policies, I hope you and your staff would consider all, and he emphasizes the word all, the evidence and not simply pen policy influenced by social or political pressures. Really good letter from the American College of Pediatricians. And they also sent information of research and data that they compiled to support this particular letter.
It'll be interesting to see how they respond to that, because you have some people in school administrations who are fearful or cautious, but would respond positively to alternative information. Then you have others who have already made up their minds and are going to be determined to stay the course. And I'm wondering if where this gentleman is on this particular issue.
I don't know. We hope that he's not closed-minded, but unfortunately for him to take those kind of severe actions, calling a person ignorant for their religious beliefs and threatening him with suspension, Superintendent Todd Carlson at the Shawano Community High School in Shawano, Wisconsin, may just be in that latter category. But we're going to continue to keep you up to date with regards to what's happening in this important case. It is outrageous what they did to Brendan. They sent a terrible message that if you disagree, what you should do is you need to call your opponent names. You need to slander them. You need to intimidate them and not engage in a civic dialogue. Go to Liberty Counsel's website for more information. We have the book by Dr. Judith Reisman called Sexual Sabotage. It is a book regarding the effects of Kinsey and the Kinsey Institute. It is a must-read. You can order it right there at Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org. Go to lc.org today.